Many times why it is that I can be so optimistic about China when the entire world's media is predicting so much pain and stress to the Chinese economy. And the answer is very simple. It's called cherry picking. That's what they do. Let me give you some examples in a while. But wherever you are, welcome to another of my takes on China. And today I'm going to talk about how media omission and media cherry-picking certain facts to suit a narrative can sway public opinion. There are challenges to China's economy. Let's not be shy or attempt to belittle them. I'm going to talk about them. First of all, the USA is hitting China with all kinds of sanctions, restrictions, and new legislation to make trade harder. And this has hurt and will continue to hurt China for a while. There was the housing crash. It's over now and is definitely flattened out, but it was caused by China making announced changes to the rules and a couple of corporations believing that they were too big to fail. If China allowed them to fail, they must have reasoned there would be a crash in the property market. China did, and there was. And the fall was harder, further, and longer than anticipated, but China bit the bullet and rectified the entire situation. It took a longer period of time, and it took deeper stimulus than they wanted. The rogue businesses are gone, property prices are now affordable, and the industry is finding its feet again. Now, as a result of the problems this crash, or as I prefer it, controlled demolition caused, there's now an oversupply of property. And China is doing things that will allow poor people to get homes sooner, which is so much better than it was when the prices were rising faster than wages. And then, of course, the final one is the youth unemployment. Again, something China knows about and is doing many things to rectify. But sanctions, property, unemployment, they all constitute problems for China. And the sum of these individual challenges does not equal a total economic collapse. How do I know? Well, apart from living here and witnessing what's happening in retail, where the shops and restaurants are busy, in transportation, where buses, cars, trains, and planes are pretty much full and moving around the province or the countryside, in hotels, which have many people staying in them every time I go to one, and online shopping, which we can see is active by the number of delivery drivers dashing around. It's clear that the economy is doing okay. Now, you don't need to be an economist or study masses of data. You can just go outside and take a look for yourself. But if we want data, let's look at some. Just a couple of days ago, new information was released that confirmed my optimism. China's exports are up. They're up by 6.7% and imports by 2.4%. Now, overall, this means foreign trade is up by 4.9%. And there isn't a developed country in the world boasting numbers like that. So most people would agree that it's a great starting point for some degree of optimism. Now, of course, you might need to look hard to confirm this. I have linked it so you don't. But you won't find it in Western media. This information was issued by the General Administration for Customs in China. And I'm a lot more confident than the pessimists, because the pessimists assume the only things that matter are trade between China and the US, or perhaps trade between China and the EU. And these have both reduced, a cherry-picked figure. This is another of the challenges that China can't afford to shy away from, but not a collapse. If trade between two of China's largest trading partners are reduced, how is it then that trade overall has increased? What is it we're not being told, and why aren't Western media telling us this? They only want to tell us how the USA is punishing China and China is hurting. They're not wrong. Although trade between China and the US is down, trade between China, Mexico, Thailand, Vietnam, and a few other countries are all up. And trade between the US and those three countries I've just mentioned is also up by a comparable amount. It simply means that the profits are either being eroded for the exporters, part of which may be true. Profits are being eroded for the importers, and there might be some truth in that. But more likely what's happening is the prices are increasing for the consumers. Either way, it's definitely hurting China a little, and companies doing business here must either cut costs or find new markets, or both. But there's a very big chance that this is hurting US consumers much more than it's hurting China, as many products left China this year, but less of them went directly to the USA than last year. And the US isn't experiencing any shortages. This means that the products going to Mexico, Vietnam and Thailand are making their way unsold to the US. As long as the US are getting the same number of products originating in China, then it isn't China that's hurting. It's the people paying more for those products that are really hurting. And that isn't China's fault. Don't blame China when the prices go up. The bottom line for China is that trade figures are fine. The markets have diversified and the customers are different, but more is going out than before, and it's continuously rising. Also, domestic consumption is increasing, but we all know that could increase a lot more. This is another of China's problems for the economists. The Chinese people simply save too much money and spend too little money. And that's true. China's domestic consumption was 48% of production compared to the USA's 81% of production. Who knew, for example, that in China the population saves 45% of its income compared to the US, which saves 3%? Most Americans can't rustle up $400 for an emergency, while there are millions of people in China with more than 1 million RMB saved into their bank accounts. I know this is true because I know these people. Who knew that home ownership in China is more than 80%? And that means total ownership, which also means that when you move in and don't have a mortgage, you have nothing else to pay for 70 years. Now, of course, you pay utilities, and if you live in a place with security, with gardens and a pool or elevator, you need to contribute to the maintenance of that, but you pay no property taxes, no rates. The downside is that in 70 years, you'll need to pay a nominal fee for the next 70 years of land use, if you're still alive, unless you live in a rural region where you have the land forever as long as your family remains on it. Now, what this also means is that if a Chinese person is unemployed, they're not rendered homeless. After a few years of almost no growth, the recent stimulus set the stock market off again. It's rising now and has been doing so for 3 or 4 months. Individual consumption is up and all the indices used to measure long-term confidence are lifting. Cherry-picking the fact that trade between the US and China is down doesn't make it a collapse. Cherry-picking the unemployment rate of one individual group of young people doesn't make an unemployment crisis when the overall rate remains below 5%, which is acceptable in any developed country. Cherry-picking the cost of homes and property development as a way of predicting the collapse of a total economy hasn't worked. China managed to survive this property development crash, or as I call it, the controlled demolition, and come out the other side in a better place. Cherry-picking the fact that Hong Kong shipping is down, without mentioning that under the one country, two systems, there are now direct exports from a new automated mega port in the cooperation zone of Nansha, where it goes through Hong Kong customs. And also Qianhai. These have both picked up. Hong Kong's economy continues to rise. Cherry-picking one bad month in a year to indicate a collapse is not going to work when the entire year is proving to be better than the last year. And one final point on cherry-picking statistics, as the West do to indicate this pending collapse, is that China is still growing at more than twice the speed of the USA, which has highly flawed methodology to calculate GDP anyway. It's growing at 10 times the speed of Australia and 20 times that of UK. Positive growth of 5% is being recorded as a negative thing in Western media because 10 years ago, when China's economy was smaller, growth was over 10%. Now, would you rather have 10% of 3 trillion or 5% of 20 trillion? That's growth. The UK media is currently reporting negative growth for that country. I have another name for negative growth. It's called loss. The UK's economy is getting smaller, but I rarely see these negative reports for the UK's minus percentages as I see for Chinese 5% growth. Something's wrong with the way the West is monitoring and reporting. If the UK's negative growth is something to be optimistic about, and the USA's 2.4% growth is a great indicator, but 5% is bad news for China's economy, it isn't. If you have friends who are pessimistic about China's prospects, ask them to look for wider pictures. Have them check online with the General Administration for Customs in China. Check with the State Security Council Information Office or even the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I've linked all 3 websites. And check with Chinese media before forming opinions. And I can assure you not one of those sites will tell you a lie. They tell you what's really happening. However, statistics, as always, can say one thing while reality shows another. It's easy to look at statistics and say, well, they don't show the real picture of life in China. So anecdotally, I can confirm what I believe and confirm that China is going okay. I went for a meal with some family members the other day in a shopping centre. It was a massive 4-level underground car park that was full. We went down to the lowest level, and that's a good indicator. There's not a car older than a few years old, and this is another good indicator that wealth is growing and has done so recently and consistently. We entered the shopping centre and we got into a packed lift, which stopped at every floor on the way to the 5th floor restaurant. On each level, people got out and people got in. When we got to the 5th floor, all the restaurants there had people waiting outside. This was a Monday. We waited 20 minutes to enter the restaurant where the main room could accommodate more than 500 people and was full. As were all the side rooms, there were more than 20 of them, another 300 or 400 people, in a packed shopping centre, a packed, massive restaurant. And the bill for 5 of us was 600 RMB. I thought it was a bit steep, but then it was pretty upmarket. It was selected by my wife's aunt, who is known for her good taste. The food was great, by the way. Indicators like that in a normal shopping centre are positive. They indicate that people in China are not suffering as much as the West would like to believe they are, or as much as the West think they are. Cherry pick all you like. I can assure you the statistics, the reality, and the stories of what's happening in China tell the real story. There hasn't been a collapse. There isn't going to be a collapse. That's all I can say. Of course, you can call me a liar if you want, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as my old mum used to say. Let's revisit this in 5 years, and then we can see who's right and who's wrong. No point arguing with me. I know what I'm seeing every day. I know what I'm reading. I know this is true. If you want to argue with me, you'd have to have better statistics and better experience, or at least different experience to me. I don't know where you go to get that, but in China, that's my experience. And I've traveled a lot outside the Greater Bay Area. It's not just local. On that happy note, I'm going to leave you for this one, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much once again for watching. Don't forget, check your subscribe button and share widely. Please feel free to share any of my work. I'm very happy for you to do that. Bye for now.